December 23rd, 1944. 11:17 a.m. 12,000 feet above Cologne, Germany. Snow clouds hung low over the Ruhr, swallowing light and sound in a muted gray haze. Thin streaks of sunlight pierced through gaps in the overcast, glinting off aluminum skins of a formation of B-26 Marauders. 31 bombers flying so tight, their wingtips seemed to tremble inches apart. The engines, Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial beasts, roared in synchronized fury, pushing the aircraft to a blistering 280 miles per hour, far faster than any German gunner had ever expected a medium bomber to come screaming through the sky. The cold inside the cockpit was sharp enough to sting exposed skin. Ice crystals shimmered along metal frames. In the lead ship, Lucky Lady 2, Captain Robert Bobby Nash, age 27, St. Louis born, son of a steel mill worker, clenched the yoke with gloved hands as he peered through the frost-crawled windscreen. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. He had flown 21 missions before this. But the Ruhr was different. Down there were the most concentrated flak batteries on Earth. 8-barrel 20mm rays, 88 stacked in rows, and radar-directed fire capable of shredding even the hardiest bomber. Nash reached up, tapping a small photograph clipped beside the gun sight. His wife, Evelyn, and their newborn daughter, whom he had not yet met. He whispered, "Just one more run, then maybe I get home." Beside him sat First Lieutenant Gerald Price, the navigator, a quiet mathematician from Boston whose pencil never stopped scratching even as turbulence rattled the aircraft. Behind them, the crew braced themselves. Staff Sergeant Tom Riker, tail gunner, who slept with a Bible under his pillow. Corporal Marty Delgado, waist gunner, who joked endlessly to hide the shaking in his hands. Tech Sergeant Owen Briggs, the engineer, who could diagnose a misfire by sound alone. Lieutenant Hal Copeland, bombardier, whose accuracy could wipe out an enemy factory in a single throw. Above all of them hung the Marauder itself, the plane that had once been mocked, ridiculed, even feared by those who flew it. The B-26's high takeoff and landing speeds earned it ugly nicknames. The Widowmaker, the Baltimore Whore, one a day in Tampa Bay. German pilots laughed at it. American crews cursed it. But in the skies over Cologne, the Marauder had become something else entirely. A predator, a weapon honed by desperate necessity, brutal training, and the sheer stubbornness of men who refused to die. Today's target lay ahead. The Kalk Nord rail junction, a heavily fortified artery feeding German divisions at the front. Destroying it would choke supply lines and stall enemy armor. Yet every gun the Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht could muster guarded it. The intercom crackled. "Lead, this is Blackbird 2. Flak bursts ahead, bearing 110. Heavy concentrations." Nash saw them, black blossoms rising in the sky like ink splatters, drifting upward with sinister patience before erupting into shrapnel storms. The Ruhr defenses had sighted them. But at 280mm, the Marauders were closing too fast for the German gunners' ideal correction arcs. Their predictive fire lagged behind, bursting where the bombers should have been, not where they actually were. "Hold tight," Nash warned. "We don't slow down. Not for anything." Below them, German flak crews scrambled in icy trenches, shouting corrections as their directors failed to compensate for the B-26's unprecedented approach speed. "Sie sind zu schnell, zu schnell!" "They're too fast." Shells erupted behind the formation, then too far left, then too far high. The Marauders cut through the chaos like knives through cloth. Inside Lucky Lady 2, the crew felt every concussion, each blast slamming the fuselage with bone-rattling force. Metal pinged as fragments grazed armor plates. A burst exploded so close that the shockwave slammed Riker against his turret. But the formation held, tight, perfectly spaced. Wingtip to wingtip, as if stitched together by invisible threads. That discipline was what made the B-26 deadly. At high speed, the only way to survive Flak was to fly so close that any mistake meant collision. And yet, any hesitation meant death. Lieutenant Copeland's voice cut through the intercom. 2 minutes to target. Nash nodded, lowering the nose a few degrees as the Ruhr industrial basin came into full view. Rail lines, warehouses, chimneys coughing black smoke through the winter air. Anti-aircraft positions were everywhere, their muzzles flashing with desperate fury. Another burst slammed near the port wing. Delgado cursed. "They're walking the fire right up our tail." But Price, studying his chronograph, whispered something that steadied them all. At this speed, they're already behind. The B-26 thundered straight into the storm. Black clouds swelled around the bombers. Snow mixed with soot filled the air like ash. The horizon blurred as Nash skimmed just below the ceiling of the Flak barrage. Enemy fighters would have pounced if they had time to catch the formation. But today, the sky belonged to speed, to the Marauders, and to the men bold enough to fly them. Ahead, the rail junction loomed. Nash tightened his grip on the controls. "Hal, make this one count." The bombardier steadied his bomb sight. His heart hammered. He imagined his mother back in Kansas telling him, "Precision is a prayer, son." Now, he needed a miracle. The Ruhr erupted beneath them, and Lucky Lady 2 dove into history. December 23, 1944, 11:19 a.m., 10,800 feet above Cologne. The B-26 Marauders tightened even further, wings rigid, engines screaming at near maximum manifold pressure. Captain Bobby Nash pushed Lucky Lady 2 into a shallow dive, letting gravity build another crucial few miles per hour. At these speeds, approaching 285. The aircraft wasn't just outrunning flak patterns, it was outrunning fear itself. Below them, the Kalk Nord junction sprawled like a mechanical heart, pumping steel and fuel toward German front lines. Tracks curved and merged into a labyrinth of switches, coal cars, and fuel tenders. Warehouses huddled beside loading platforms. Everything was dusted with a thin sheen of snow that reflected the silver shapes dropping from the sky. Inside the bombardier's compartment, Lieutenant Hal Copeland slid his face closer to the Norden bomb site. The world narrowed to crosshairs and oscillating gyros. His breath fogged the glass. He whispered the same ritual words he used on every mission. Steady, steady. Nash could not see the target, only confirm over intercom. "Hal, it's your aircraft." The instant those words were spoken, every control input transferred to the bombardier. Copeland now held the fate of the entire ship in his hands. The Marauder's nose dipped 1 degree, then another. Anti-aircraft fire intensified. A wall of black explosions rose to meet them. Dense, overlapping bursts from 88mm cannons synchronized by radar. The Germans were firing blind into predictive squares of sky, hoping the Marauders would be foolish enough to slow down. But these were not green crews. Not anymore. Months of brutal training at MacDill and Barksdale had forged deadly habits. Never climb, never slow, never break formation on the bomb run. A concussive blast hammered the starboard side. Lucky Lady 2 rocked violently, metals shrieking, oxygen lines rattling. Price grabbed the navigator's table to keep from being thrown sideways. From the waist compartment, Delgado shouted, his voice shaking. "Jesus, that one peeled paint off the wing." But Riker, the tail gunner, said nothing. He simply watched the storm behind them, jaw clenched, praying silently. Another burst erupted dead ahead. Shrapnel rang across the cockpit glass like thrown gravel. One fragment punched through a frame and embedded itself in the panel inches from Nash's knee. Copeland's voice remained steady. Left drift compensated. Hold. Hold. Nash felt sweat running down his spine despite the freezing cockpit. Then came the German fighters. 3 Duel 190 A8s, low and climbing hard, emerging from the cloud deck like dark arrows. Their pilots had heard rumors of the Marauders' new tactics, fast, low, impossible to track. But seeing them now, slicing through Flak at suicidal velocity, was something else entirely. The Luftwaffe leader, Oberleutnant Franz Miller, 24, veteran of the Eastern Front, saw the approaching formation and scoffed. Medium bombers think they can outrun us? He pushed his throttle forward, engine whining as the 190 clawed for altitude. But he miscalculated. By the time his flight reached attack height, the B-26s were already passing beneath him. Too fast, too tight, too unpredictable. His wingman shouted, "Sie sind zu schnell. Ich kann keinen Vorhalt berechnen." They're too fast. I can't calculate the lead. Miller cursed, rolled inverted, and dove after them. But the Marauders were already streaking through the kill zone. Back inside Lucky Lady 2, Copeland's voice reached its breaking point. "Bombs! Away!" 500-pound bombs dropped in perfect cadence, tumbling through the freezing air before stabilizing into their destructive glide. A half-second later, every ship in the lead element released theirs. The sky glittered with falling steel. Nash snapped back control, pulling the Marauder into a shallow climb, engines roaring at emergency power to clear the flak zone before the ground erupted. "Hold on." The bomb struck. The Kalk-Nord junction ripped apart. Rail lines erupted in geysers of dirt and shrapnel. Boxcars shattered. Coal dust billowed upward in a churning black cloud. A fuel tender ignited in a blinding flash, sending shockwaves rippling toward the retreating formation. In the cockpit, Price looked back through the glass. "Direct hit," he whispered. "We nailed it, Bobby. Dead center." But Nash wasn't celebrating. He was staring at his instruments, seeing what no pilot ever wanted to see. Oil pressure on engine number 1, dropping. Temperature climbing. A hit, somewhere in the barrage. Something had punctured a line. The aircraft shuddered. Briggs' voice crackled through the intercom, strained but controlled. "We've got a leak. Might seize on us." Nash exhaled slowly. One bad engine on a Marauder during climb-out could mean death. And the Ruhr's flak belts were far from finished. Behind them, the German 88s reoriented, adjusting for speed, speed, angle, and escape vectors. The sky flashed again. A new wall of explosions rose ahead. The Widowmaker had survived the run. Now, it had to survive the way home. December 23rd, 1944, 11:23 a.m., 9,500 feet east of Cologne. The B-26 formation punched through the first ring of flak, only to meet a second, dense, rapid, and merciless, fed by radar sets recalibrating in real time. German gunners, furious after witnessing the destruction of the rail hub, adjusted their fire patterns. They no longer aimed for predictive boxes. They fired everywhere. Black bursts engulfed the sky. The Marauders dove lower, down to barely 6,000 feet, skimming the top of the industrial haze to break radar lock. Their engines thundered like rolling avalanches as they tore across the Ruhr at speeds more common to fighters than twin-engine bombers. Inside Lucky Lady 2, Captain Bobby Nash fought the yoke. feeling vibration growing on the left side. Engine number one's oil pressure needle trembled at dangerously low levels. Every shudder threatened to seize the engine and rip the prop apart. "Briggs, talk to me," Nash demanded. The engineer's voice crackled back, tight with worry. "Oil pressure dropping fast. Leaks worse than I thought. If she overheats, she'll freeze solid." Nash ran scenarios through his mind. Losing an engine in the Ruhr at this altitude? With flak and fighters tightening like a snare? Suicide. But turning back wasn't an option. They had one vector, forward. The intercom snapped alive. "Fighters, 6 o'clock low," Riker shouted from the tail turret. Mailer and his two FW-190s had closed the distance at last, emerging from the haze with predatory intent. Their yellow-nosed fighters glinted as they dove for attack runs, cannons armed with Menengeschoss rounds capable of shearing a bomber in half. Their disbelief from earlier was gone. This time, they weren't laughing. Mailer fired first. 3 blinding white streaks that sliced past Lucky Lady 2's tail. Riker squeezed his 50 cals in reply, tracers streaking into the smoke-choked air. The vibration of the turret rattled through his bones. He didn't care. If he didn't fire, they would die. Bullets stitched across Mailer's canopy, near misses, but close enough to force him to break off. But his wingman, Lieutenant Kroll, held steady, lining up on Nash's left engine. "Damn it! He's trying to finish the cripple!" Briggs shouted. Nash rolled right, hard. The Marauder groaned under the strain. At high speed, such a maneuver was borderline suicidal. But at this moment, caution was death. Kroll's burst sliced through empty air as Lucky Lady 2 snapped out of his firing lane. "Good move, Cap," Delgado hollered, though his voice wavered. He swung his waist gun around, firing into the 190 that flashed across their flank. Brass casings clattered to the floor. The enemy fighters regrouped. The Marauders tightened formation again, wingtip to wingtip, as their only defense. Lone stragglers were easy prey. A tight box was a fortress of intersecting 50 cal fire. "Stay close," Nash barked. "No gaps." The formation weaved through the Ruhr Valley, every ship juking at high speed to disrupt the fighters' attack runs. Mailer found, to his disgust, that positioning was nearly impossible. The Marauders moved like a single organism, fast, disciplined, impenetrable. This isn't a bomber formation, he realized bitterly. This is a shield wall. His wingman tried once more, looping behind the trailing element. But he slipped too close, to within 300 yards of overlapping gun coverage. 7 Marauders opened up simultaneously. A storm of 50 cal fire converged on the German fighter. Tracers punched through its fuselage, wings, engine cowling. Flames erupted from the oil cooler. The FW-190 spiraled away, trailing smoke before slamming into the frosted earth below. Riker whispered, "One less chasing us." But Mailer, furious and humiliated, was still coming. He dove ahead of the formation, attempting a head-on pass, one of the most dangerous tactics available, but one that could break a bomber formation if executed perfectly. At the same moment, Nash saw something horrific. Engine number one's temperature gauge spiked red. Briggs shouted, "She's gonna seize!" Nash had seconds to decide, feather the prop and reduce drag, or gamble and push the failing engine to hold formation. If he feathered now, he'd drop behind. And Mailer would kill them. He gritted his teeth. "Hold it. Briggs, keep her alive however you can." "Trying, sir," Briggs answered, already throttling back just enough to drop temps without killing speed. Every adjustment he made was like walking a razor's edge. The Marauders shuddered again. then stabilized. Mailer lined up his head-on run. Nash saw the yellow-nosed 190 growing in the windshield, guns flickering with muzzle flashes. Time slowed. Every vibration, every instrument needle, every breath became painfully vivid. Nash rolled slightly left, just enough for the top turret to bear. "Light him up!" he yelled. Sergeant O'Donnell, in the turret, squeezed both triggers. Twin 50 cals erupted. The nose of Lucky Lady 2 shook from the recoil. Tracers reached out like burning arrows. 3 struck Mailer's cowling. Another punctured his wing root. A 5th detonated near his oil cooler. His aircraft spewed a stream of black smoke, canopy fogging as he yanked the stick to avoid a collision. He barely cleared the Marauder's wing. His engine sputtered. Flames licked the underside of his fuselage. Oberleutnant Franz Mailer, scourge of the Eastern Front, peeled away, defeated by a bomber he once called a flying coffin. Behind Lucky Lady 2, his mark faded into the winter haze. Inside the cockpit, Nash exhaled shakily. We're not out of this yet. Ahead lay the final flak belt, thicker, angrier, more accurate. Engine number 1 coughed again, and the Rhine River glittered in the distance. The border between death and home. December 23, 1944, 11:31 a.m., 7,200 feet, approaching the Rhine River. The B-26 formation thundered low over factory rooftops and smoking rail yards, engines howling as they fought for speed and altitude. Behind them, the ruined Kalk Nord junction still burned, a molten scar on the landscape, black smoke rising into the snow-heavy sky. But ahead, the Germans had prepared a final, lethal welcome. A third flak belt, thicker than anything they had yet endured, lay stretched across the river like a wall of fire. Multiple 88mm batteries, backed by clusters of rapid-firing 20mm and 37mm guns, waited with icy precision. In those emplacements, German crews barked range corrections and elevation commands. Their officers pointed at the approaching B-26s, their faces grim and furious. This time, speed would not save the Americans. Inside Lucky Lady 2, Captain Bobby Nash felt the left engine shudder again. The oil pressure needle hovered just above the red line, miraculously stable. "Briggs, you're working magic back there." The engineer clung to the bulkhead with one arm, his other hand carefully adjusting throttle fractions, coaxing the engine like a dying animal. "She's alive," Briggs said, voice strained. "But she's angry." The intercom snapped with urgent voices. "Lead, this is Blackbird 4, Rhine flak ahead, heavy concentrations. Copper 9, taking sporadic hits, port wing. Bombardier compartment on Red Fox is venting, still flying." The formation tightened again, every pilot knowing that survival depended on unity. Lieutenant Price, the navigator, leaned forward. "That belt extends at least 4 miles, he warned. "We'll be in it for over a minute." A minute in a flak belt was a century of fear. A low tremor ran through the Marauder as Nash steadied the yoke. He could feel every vibration through the control column, every twist of metal under strain. "We go together," Nash said calmly. "Nobody breaks." The first bursts erupted. Massive black puffs of 88mm fire surrounded the lead ships, shockwaves slamming against the fuselages. Shrapnel pinged across armor plating like hailstones on a tin roof. Delgado's voice cracked through the intercom. "They're bracketing us, right and left." Riker shouted from the tail. "They're getting the range." Nash flew by instinct and reflex, weaving at high speed, not enough to break formation, but enough to throw off German firing solutions. The second volley came closer. A blossom of fire engulfed the space between Lucky Lady 2 and her right-hand wingman. Metal fragments shredded through the air, slicing into the trailing edges of the wings. O'Donnell, in the top turret, braced himself as the shockwave rattled his harness. Sweet mother, they're trying to vaporize us. More bursts, louder, closer. The sky turned into a swirling canyon of explosions and smoke. A Marauder in the second element took a direct hit to its starboard engine. The nacelle erupted into flame. The aircraft rolled into a slow descending turn, its pilot fighting the inevitable. "Pilot of Gold 6, bail out," Nash called over the formation frequency. But the stricken B-26 kept descending, burning fiercely. No parachutes appeared. Price bowed his head. God help them. Lucky Lady 2 pressed on. Engine number 1 coughed again, a deep, mechanical groan that sent dread through the cockpit. Briggs yelled, "Cap, she's overheating again." "Just a little further," Nash said through clenched teeth. "Come on, girl. Don't die now." Another flak burst. This one so close it rocked the entire nose section. Copeland was thrown against his bomb sight mount, gasping as shards of plexiglass rained across him. "I'm okay," he shouted, coughing. "Still here." The Marauder dropped to 6,500 feet in a controlled descent, gaining airspeed. Nash used every trick he knew, every maneuver drilled into him at MacDill to keep the aircraft a moving target. The flak gunners were furious. Their predictions? Wrong. Their timing? Useless. Every second, the Marauders' speed stole their kill shot. One battery commander slammed his binoculars down, shouting at his crew. "They're too fast. Stop firing ahead. Aim where they shouldn't be." But by the time he issued the correction, the Marauders were already past. The burst patterns lagged behind. Explosions trailed in their wake. Then, light. The smoke thinned. The sky opened. The Rhine River glinted beneath them, cold and wide. They were through. A collective exhale passed through every ship. Briggs slumped back into his seat. "We made it. Damn it all. We made it." But Price wasn't celebrating yet. He stared at the left engine gauge again. "Bobby, it's dying." Nash nodded once. Feathering 1. He reached for the control. The prop blades twisted to knife-edge position. The left engine sputtered, coughed, and fell silent. The cockpit suddenly felt colder, quieter, heavier. Lucky Lady 2 now flew on a single engine, across enemy territory, with kilometers to go before friendly lines. But the worst was behind them. Behind them, the Germans' disbelief had turned into grudging admiration. "Diese Teufel, sie fliegen wie Jäger." These devils, they fly like fighters. The B-26 Marauder, mocked for years, had torn through Cologne's defenses at speeds no flak battery could match. It had become something new. Something feared. Something whispered about. The Widowmaker of Cologne. And the legend had only just begun to spread. December 23, 1944, 11:47 a.m., 6,200 feet west of the Rhine. Lucky Lady 2 flew wounded and lopsided, one engine dead, the other straining to hold power. The entire fuselage vibrated in an uneven tremor as if the Marauder herself was gasping for breath. Frost crept across the inside of the cockpit glass. The smell of hot oil and burning insulation lingered in the stale oxygen mask air. Captain Bobby Nash held the yoke firmly, feeling the heavy drag pulling them left. Flying on one R-2800 at low altitude wasn't just difficult. It was a knife edge. He glanced at the feathered prop. "You did good, girl. Just a little further." Lieutenant Gerald Price, map spread across his trembling knees, pushed his spectacles up and said, "We're maybe 15 minutes from crossing our lines, if we stay level." Nash smirked weakly. Level is the plan. Behind them, in the tail, Tom Riker looked out over the disappearing flak belts. The smoke and fire of the Ruhr shrank into a distant bruise. He exhaled hard, first with relief, then with grief. He whispered a prayer for the crew of Gold 6. No one answered. In the waist, Delgado slumped against the fuselage, his 50 cal barrels still smoking. He removed his gloves, hands shaking violently, and muttered, "I swear, that was hell. Pure hell." Tech Sergeant Briggs crawled forward from the rear systems bay, his face streaked with grime and hydraulic fluid. "Cap," he said, breathless. "Your engine's holding steady on output, but we can't climb. Don't even try." "I'm not climbing," Nash said. "I'm just trying to stay in the sky." Then Price spoke again, quiet, pained. "Bobby, look." He pointed through the windscreen. The flight formation, once 31 aircraft strong, was now scattered. Several Marauders limped along, missing engine cowlings, trailing smoke. One had a shattered nose cone. Another flew with its gear half extended, hydraulic lines shredded. Two more never made it through. Inside Lucky Lady 2, the weight of that truth settled upon them. The Ruhr didn't hand out victories for free. At 11:58 a.m., they finally crossed into friendly airspace. Below, snow-covered fields gave way to Allied convoys and the winding ant-like trails of tank divisions pushing east. The intercom erupted. "Lucky Lady, this is Blackbird 2, checking in. Red Fox still airborne, starboard engine leaking, but we're alive. Blackbird 4, we're good, minor flak damage." Each voice was a relief, each voice a reminder that luck had limits. When they were finally within sight of their home base in Belgium, A60, Charleroi, a sudden silence filled the cockpit. Copeland, the bombardier, removed his headset, wiping dried blood from his temple where the earlier explosion had thrown him. He whispered, "Bobby, you got us home." Nash didn't answer at first. He was too focused, too drained. Flying a B-26 on one engine during landing was the part most pilots feared. The Marauder's reputation, its early spate of training crashes, came from this moment. High landing speeds, narrow gear, and no margin for error. But he could not afford fear. "Everyone brace," Nash said softly. "This will be rough." He aligned with the runway, fighting the drag. Left rudder, more left rudder, counter with trim, throttle steady. The Marauder dipped, then steadied. The wheels screeched as they hit the frozen ground. The aircraft bounced once, hard, then Nash forced it down. The landing gear groaned, but held. The bomber rolled to a trembling stop. Silence. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Riker's voice broke through, choked and emotional. "We made it." Delgado let out a long, ragged laugh. "Widowmaker, my ass." Briggs slumped over his panel, hands covering his eyes. Copeland rested his forehead against the cold bomb sight casing. And Nash? Nash stared straight ahead, tears forming but never falling. Hours later, after debriefing, after their hands stopped shaking, after the adrenaline had burned itself to ash, they gathered outside the hangar. Mechanics swarmed over the damaged Marauder, shaking their heads at the holes, the missing rivets, the shredded lines, the dead engine. "You flew that home?" one asked. Nash didn't answer. He didn't need to. Word spread fast. The Marauders had hit Cologne at nearly 290 miles, slicing through the Ruhr's deadliest defenses with surgical precision. They had outrun Flak, outmaneuvered fighters, and destroyed a key rail artery feeding German forces. And they had returned, battered, broken, but alive. That evening, A British liaison officer muttered something that stuck. Those Yanks, they've turned that bloody death trap into a scalpel. A German POW overheard the talk and scoffed. The B-26? Fast, yes, but she kills her crews. But another POW, who had manned an 88 that day, shook his head slowly. No, not today. His voice was low, almost reverent. Today she moved too fast. We could not hit them. We fired, and they were already gone. He looked toward the distant sky. They call it the Widowmaker. But today, over Cologne, it was the Hunter. The B-26 Marauder never fully escaped its early stigma. But among the men who flew it through the Ruhr, through walls of steel and fire, it earned a new name. The Widowmaker of Cologne. A bomber that laughed in the face of Flak. A machine forged by fear, but perfected by courage. A weapon flown by crews who refused to die. And on that frigid December day, above that burning rail yard, its legend was written into history, in smoke, in fire, and in the hearts of the men who survived it. If you found it compelling, give it a like and share it with someone who appreciates these tales of courage. And don't forget to subscribe for